I don't know if any of you were with us earlier on up in the main arena, but I had the pleasure of having a chat with Ian and asking him a few questions about his experience on Game of Thrones and a little bit about his career to date and his opinions on all things to do with Game of Thrones. We're going to have another little chat here and we'll hopefully not repeat ourselves.
Well,
I think
in fact, I don't see
any familiar faces. Did anyone see? Just to raise your hands. Did anyone see our interview earlier on? Just the one at the bottom. We'll try not to repeat too much of it.
Yeah.
We'll give you a little bit of
other stuff
as well, hopefully. So, as I said, it's an absolute pleasure to have Ian McElhinney here with us. Ian was famous for his role as Sir Barristan Selmy on Game of Thrones. But before we talk a little bit about that, I suppose a little overview of your entry into the acting world.
Yeah.
And then we'll move on to the Game of Thrones world as well.
Yeah, I mean, if there's anybody here who thinks they might want to be an actor, don't worry if it takes a bit of time. Or don't worry if it's a slow process, because that was my experience. I had been an actor for a long time now, but I didn't actually start acting until I was 30. So if you're 19 and think you want to go into it, don't despair, you've got plenty of time. I guess I got the acting bug when I was a schoolboy, and even when I left school I fancied going into the theatre. But certainly in those days it seemed like, a pretty impecunious sort of career. You could spend your time, hanging around waiting for work rather than working. And I mean, in those days, the obvious go-to thing was the theatre. And we didn't necessarily know a great deal about how to break into film or TV or anything like that. It's a much more open sort of world nowadays. So I was nervous about it. I spent all my time as a student sort of doing plays, but after my first degree I sort of thought I should try and get away from this. I should go and get a proper job. And I wanted to go and live in the States for a bit, so I went to a college in America to do a further degree with a view to doing something other than theatre. And as fate would have it, I went to a college that had a theatre school, but I wasn't in it, because I was studying something completely different. And I became so jealous of those who were that I felt this is not fair. I've got to be there, not where I am. So I went into the theatre school and did a second degree in theatre. And although it was a university, it was a practical course. You went in as an actor or a director or a designer or a playwright. So I did that, and then even then I was still nervous about going into the business. So I came home home at the time was actually England, to Yorkshire, and I taught for 4 years. And then precisely because I was looking at 30 and I'd had this bee in my bonnet from I was 15, I thought, well, this is ridiculous. If you don't go now, you're never going to go. And when you're the age I am now, you'd be looking back saying, if only I had, or what if I had. You'd just be resenting the fact that you hadn't tried. So I tried, and I'm glad to say it worked well enough for me that I stuck at it, and now I can't do anything else anyway, and I'm lucky in that in a lot of jobs at my age you'd actually be retired. I don't have to retire, I don't want to retire, I'm very happy working. And it's kind of great to be able to go off and still do this job and not be sort of retired and out playing bowls or golf or whatever it may be. It's nice to have different options. So that's a little bit on that.
And can I ask, or may I ask, what you studied at university prior to theatre?
In my first, listen, I was 8 years as a student. I got lucky. I went to do languages, ended up doing a degree in sociology. I went to America to do international politics, and ended up doing a degree in theatre studies.
Yeah.
So,
8 years a student.
8 years a student.
That's the way it should be. So you came to get an audition then for Game of Thrones.
Yeah.
And for those that weren't with us earlier, you didn't read for the part that you got originally.
No, well, I read for three parts.
I
read for 3 parts because they thought, well, he might be a possibility for one or other of these. I read for Barristan, which I played, but I also read for Tywin, and I read for Sir the senior Mormons. What was his first name? I can't remember. The part that James Cosmo played, you know.
So
Old Mormons I think is how he was. So I read. Sorry.
Jor Mormont.
No, Jorah was the younger.
Jor was the older. Jorah is the son. Yeah.
Oh, really? Were they both Jorahs?
Well, no, Jor is J. E-O-R. It's a made-up fantasy name.
Right. Well, Old Mormon, that one.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. James Cosmo played it, but I read for those three, and they offered me some Barristan, which I was delighted about, and I really enjoyed doing it. And then they killed me off far too soon. But there you go. You know, their choice. What can I do?
And on your time in Game of Thrones, then. 5 seasons, and your character was known as the greatest swordsman in Westeros, and eventually we see some of those skills at your end. But when you were filming your final scene, your death scene, and you had that sword fight, how did that go about the training for that? And
well, the interesting about that fight is all the people who played. This is one of the advantages, that they all were masked. All the harpies wore masks. All of those guys were stuntmen. So they had worked out a routine with the stunt coordinator where they knew everything that they were supposed to do, and then all they had to do, in theory, was fit me into it. So what it meant was, when I went in to sort of like rehearse with them, it was just a case of, well, these are the moves, that's who you kill there, that's who you kill there, that's who gets the better of you there, and so on. And then it's like learning a dance. It's like muscle memory. You know, you just have this, then that, you know, then spin, then fall against the wall, and land at your back, whatever it might be. And in total with that, it was actually quite a long, as fights go, it's quite a long sequence. It was probably about, I don't know 100%, probably 40 moves.
Yeah.
Now, one of the great advantages of anything on film is, you may think it's fast, but if you go too fast, the camera really just doesn't catch it, just catches a flurry of movement. So it's measured. And because it's these big broad swords, it's also measured, because you have to do, with a broadsword, it's none of this sort of fancy stuff like with an épée or a foil, you know, light fencing where it's all about the footwork. With broadswords, it's all about whole body movement. The power of the arm comes from the leg and the whole body, so you know you're positioning yourself to get the full swing into every move. And if anything looks a bit fancy, it's wrong. You've got to get that sense of weight, you know, of strength. But the advantage of that is necessarily every move is measured, it's steady, it's not frantic. So you don't have to lose the run of yourself and start swiping all around you, because then, apart from the fact it doesn't look good, you're probably going to be dangerous and hurt somebody. So, you know, you get used to steady 1, steady 2, steady 3, steady 4, and you know, it all comes together. Because it's quite a long sequence, you don't shoot it all in one go. You shoot, I mean, this is kind of quite nicely split in that the first half, Barristan's on top, and he's killing people all around him, and you think he's going to win the day. And then there comes a point where he gets knocked to the side, and from there on he's under pressure, and you kind of see the inevitable coming. So we shot it in those two halves, the period where he's on top, the period where he's, you know, collapsing. And we shot both ways. You always do with film, you shoot from this end, looking that way, and then you go up the other end and shoot the way back as well. So that you're getting as much coverage of all of the players as you can. But because it's a big fight sequence, and because you want to be able to kind of cut in at interesting points, we used 4 cameras. So you've got one which is like the wide shot, we might even use 5. One which is the wide shot, one which is, in my case, the full body shot, i.e. me and not necessarily the whole world that I'm in. One that would be this sort of a shot, mid-body shot. One would be a feet shot, so that you watch the feet. And probably one other, you know what I mean? So you've got all of those shots playing whenever you're doing the sequence. And film being film, necessarily you probably do it a number of times, you know, until they feel they've got everything they need. and then they turn around and they shoot it the other way, and then when you've done that, you do the second lot of it, and they do that the other way, and then the final bit is the actual, you know, the death. Like, now we don't know at the end of the episode that it was actually the death. What we do know is that he's definitely seriously wounded. So they needed to see, with both Grey Worm and myself collapse, they needed to see blood on the ground. So they put on you what they call a blood pack, which is like, it's like a black cushion, but it's filled with, you know, stage gore. And somehow or another, magically, they can trigger the thing, you know, remotely, so that, you know, they, having done the whole fight, they start the end sequence where you're already on the ground, and it's just for that final moment where you see the life leaving the body and the blood seeping out and all that, you know. The sequence was shot in a day. It took about a day to shoot it, but as I say, it was quite carefully broken down. The rehearsal for it, because they had been rehearsed separately, and I don't know how much they did, but they were rehearsed separately. They probably worked with me about 3 times at, say, weekly intervals, just for me to get into it. And then whenever we knew we were going to shoot it in 2 halves, it would be like, well, let's make sure we got the sequence for the first half done. Now let's make sure we got the sequence for the second half done, you know. So at least you were retaining muscle memory, if you like. You were retaining only X number of steps in, X number of moves. So it's the same principle as learning a dance, you know. But it was fun. I mean, it was fun to do. I enjoyed that scene. I just wished that it hadn't ended the way it did, or at the time that it did. But there you go.
You've read books.
I read the books.
And that was a problem.
That was a problem. Because,
for your character?
Yes, for me. Because in book 5, not only does Barristan not die, Barristan becomes quite a significant figure who looks like he's going to have a more significant future, because he's taken control of Meereen, given that Daenerys has flown the coop. But in their take on the story, they decided to kill me off, which was very disappointing to me. I was sorry about that at the time, you know. There's no point denying it. I was disappointed about that, but you know, history, it's gone now, you know. On to other things.
Well, indeed, many other things. Derry Girls being one of them.
Yes, Derry Girls being one of them.
Which is you couldn't get more of a contrast in character. I would have thought.
No, it's very nice. I mean, you know, from an actor point of view, to do vastly different things is sort of, it's great fun, because you're not being typecast for starters, and necessarily you're exercising a different sensibility. So you feel better, you know what I mean? It's not like you're locked into, oh, I'm always this, you know what I mean? You can have a bit of variety. In fact, in that last season of Game of Thrones, there was a period where I was overlapping 2 parts. I'd also been working on a series called Ripper Street, as had the guy who plays Bronn, Jerome. And on Ripper Street, I played an absolute bastard. He was a totally evil, villainous character who was quite happy to order for people to be killed in the most sort of objectionable of ways. He was cruel. So, you know, one day you'd be down in Dublin being cruel, and another day you'd be up in Belfast being the reasonable man. You know what I mean? So it was quite nice to have those contrasts. Just that feeling of not being locked into something was great, you know?
Back to, obviously, the role in Game of Thrones scene that we're at Winterfell Festival.
Yeah.
Had you had much experience in sword fighting? Had you had in your career?
No, I'd done a few sword fights on stage, or a few fights generally on stage when I was admittedly younger. I haven't done much of the sort of the light sword fencing. I mean, a lot of people at drama schools, they will teach you that, épée or foil or whatever. I haven't done much of that, but then in truth, I've never had to do that. Most of the fighting I've ever done has been with a broadsword.
And what about the horse riding? Had you had much experience of horseback riding, or?
I'll tell you a few things about the horses. Some of you may remember there was an actor called Roy Kinnear. Very funny man, actually. And sadly, he died on a production of The Three Musketeers, which they made somewhere in Spain. This is like 20 years ago, more, probably 30 years ago now. And his horse had slipped on cobblestones because they were wet.
Yeah.
And he had come off the horse, and he was quite a heavy set man. Whatever way he fell, he died from that.
Okay.
He's the father of Rory Kinnear, a well-known young leading actor now. I thought after that there would be a very strong argument for actors to say, I'm not prepared to be on a horse. You know, you put a stuntman on a horse, or you can shoot me sitting on a horse and that's all I'll do. I think some people did take it seriously in the sense that last year, it's nearly 3 years ago now, for the BBC, I did a series called Redwater. And it was kind of interesting with Redwater. They would say, can you steer a boat? Can you ride a horse? Are you happy on a motorbike? You know, can you run? Can you swim? Because at some point, all of us, it seems, had to do these kind of things. The boat stuff, by the way, was great gas. Loved doing that. You know, it was like, is this work? You know, it was great. The horse riding is rather tougher, but being the BBC, they're very strict. So because I had all these different activities I had to do, and I've never had it before, and I'll probably never have it again, I had a swimming stunt, I had a running stunt, I had a horse riding stunt, I had a boat stunt. I didn't want to have them in a sense, because you want to do all these things yourself. That's part of the fun. You want to do it. But they have these people as insurance. So that at any point they can say, we think that's a bit risky, or you're not very good at doing that, so we'll put in somebody else. You know, and so all these guys were useful at some point. But with the horse riding, I mean, they are very strict about it. They would have me on the horse, they would have me walking on the horse, they might even have me trotting on the horse, although in actual fact trotting is the hardest thing to do on a horse. Cantering or galloping is actually easier because rhythmically it's easier. Trotting, you kind of get this sort of thing that doesn't look very attractive and is wrong. So, you know, in a situation like that, they put in a proper horseman because they can either, you know, judge the rhythm of the horse, or they can sit into the saddle in spite of the trot. So, you know, in some cases, the BBC has to say, A, it's cautious, B, it probably has the money to do that. In some cases on film, they say, tough, we don't have these guys, you do it. You know what I mean? But with Game of Thrones, I mean, they were very good. We had Camilla, her mum is actually the person who runs the sort of Devil's Horseman that we've been watching. Camilla was the sort of the principal horsewoman on Game of Thrones, and she's excellent, and you know, being around horses from, she was knee high to a grasshopper. And so we would all have worked out with her, and certainly when we were in Morocco, we did have to do quite a bit of stuff on horses, and you got used to it. But I had an interesting lesson very early on. When we arrived in Marrakesh, and for 3 or 4 days, the only thing I had to do was go out and get horse riding practice. And I was wearing jeans and just normal underwear. And something I learnt, which I hadn't really thought about before, is if you go horse riding, it's wise to wear something like cycle shorts, which cling to your bum. Because if you wear normal underwear, what happens is, it shuffles about. I actually got friction burns on my backside. Seriously. I remember having to go into the nurse and saying, I'm sorry, and having to take my trousers down and show her my backside so that she could put, you know, ointment on them. Because I actually got skinned, you know, on the backside.
A skill that we all need to remember. That's something you don't hear often.
But fortunately I got over the friction burns, and then I was fine from then on out. But, you know, wear the right kind of gear, basically.
That's it. We've been very lucky to see the Devil's Horseman in action there this afternoon. Don't know if any of you got to see some of their demonstrations. And, you know, working on Game of Thrones, where you've got phenomenal sets, stellar cast, hundreds of extras, animals, children, all the things that you're not meant to perform with. You were saying about the fight scene, which obviously you can imagine would take a while to film, but you said you did that in a day.
Yeah.
But were there examples of small, which ended up being maybe a few minutes on TV, taking days and days to shoot? I mean,
yeah, you know, the hardest thing to actually shoot on screen is action stuff. I remember on something entirely different, a thing called Grass Cutter years ago, having a shootout in a restaurant at the top of a mountain. And in the final edit, this lasts like 90 seconds probably. We would have shot 100 what they call setups. Every time you set the camera up to take a specific shot and light accordingly, that's a setup. Whereas takes, you know, once the camera's set up, you could do 1 take or 10 takes or whatever. We would have done over 100 setups over 3 days in this studio kitchen to get 90 seconds worth of film, and that would take 3 days. Stunts, you know, when it comes to the final thing, it's 90 seconds, it's very exciting.
Yeah.
In the making of it, it's 3, truthfully, very long, tedious days, you know, because it involves so much. We've got to get this moment, we've got to get that moment, we've got to wait to this, we've got to wait to that, we've got to get the wide picture, we've got to get the narrow, you know, there's just so many options. I mean, I was surprised in some way with the fight in Game of Thrones that they didn't do more cutaways, you know, but when you see the final product you realise they didn't actually need them. But sometimes, quite often, you see in a fight sequence, there's a very close shot on a slash on the arm or whatever, and the blood sort of oozing out of the wrists. But even to get that, you just stop and think about what's entailed. That takes quite a lot of time, you know. No, Game of Thrones, of its very nature, did involve big scenes with a lot of people. I mean, half a dozen, quote, principals, and then probably a couple of hundred extras. And because they were big sort of setups, they might, you know, that one scene might be shot over 2-3 days, you know, depending on the nature of the scene. Whereas ordinarily, you know, if you're shooting a scene with 1 or 2 people, you might expect to knock off 3 or 4 scenes in a day, you know. But when you do those big scenes, you know that we're coming back here tomorrow to do more of the same, you know.
Well, I've just a couple of questions left because I'm conscious of the fact of time constraints. So I wanted to see, with Game of Thrones, we're coming into the final season. It's airing, I think, sometime next year.
Yeah.
Where do you think it's going to go? Where do you think we're going to end up? Who's going to be on the
Well, I was saying earlier, one option is because no matter who's put on the throne, somebody will not be happy. One option is kill everybody. So basically, we got dragons after all. It's a nuclear holocaust. The place gets destroyed. Nobody lives. Everybody's happy. Because, you know, well, that's one option. I don't think that will happen, to be honest. I think, who knows? I don't think it'll be the obvious. I don't think it'll be Daenerys. I don't think it'll even be Jon Snow. I was saying previously that my hunch is that Bran will be significant. How significant, I don't know, but I think he will be very significant. Because I think if you're thinking just about the logic of the story, way back when, it started with Bran being pushed out of the window and losing the magical powers that he had as a young boy climbing, and a young boy with huge promise. Now he's got different magical powers, and they are significant. So I think he'll become very, very important in the final analysis. Whether that means he ends up on the throne, I don't know. But I would say watch out for what happens to Bran. I think that would be.
And the final question that I have before maybe give everybody here an opportunity, the impact of Game of Thrones on Northern Ireland.
Yeah.
For the acting industry, the film industry, tourism.
Yeah.
Do you think it's something that will I mean, Game of Thrones will have a legacy for us here?
I think it is a game changer, yeah. I think because it's been so big, it's gone on here for so long, it has, you know, been a stable part of our economy for 10 years, and a significant part of the economy for 10 years. And the fact that it is known all over the world, and therefore this place is getting known through it all over the world, I think it will have a huge impact. I think within this industry, it's definitely having a huge impact because film, now it would have predated Game of Thrones, but film as a major industry started really with the peace process, you know, or after the Good Friday Agreement. Basically, film started to come online as a major industry. It's grown. Game of Thrones has given it a huge injection, and it's carrying on growing, and it's getting bigger. There are many other things being shot here besides Game of Thrones. I mean, Derry Girls, for instance, is shot here. Krypton, another series I'm involved with, is shot in other studios on the other side of the lot, which are new. There's more new studios being built, and an awful lot of stuff that the Beeb does that may not appear to be set here, in fact is not set here, is shot here. The most obvious one at the moment is Line of Duty, for instance, you know, is shot here. There's an awful lot of stuff being filmed in Northern Ireland now, and it's definitely a major industry, I think, for the future and for the economy. And okay, they're not sitting at the moment, but I think the guys in Stormont are very aware of the importance, the economic importance, if not the artistic importance. They're very aware of the economic importance of film, and they will be, you know, doing their best to ensure that stuff keeps coming in, and if possible sitting in, you know. I mean, the great thing about Game of Thrones is that you have a client for 10 years, you know, and a lot of other things, they come, they go in the course of a year or a matter of a few months. Krypton, touch wood, with a bit of luck, it will sit in for a handful of years, you know, and obviously when you get big projects like that that are likely to stay put, that's a really fine injection to the economy, you know.
And just to follow up on that then, yes, there's been a huge increase in skills in editing and the whole production side of film and television here. But for the acting world, do you think that it'll have a legacy on developing a growth in local talent? Not to say that we never had local talent, but the use of our local talent. But even that whereas many actors will maybe have to have left Northern Ireland to go and do their studying and get their career, do you think there's a possibility that we might find that we might actually be able to maintain our actors within our
not just our actors, our filmmakers as well, our designers, directors. I mean, I think historically people went off to train and usually said, well, the prospects are better wherever they had gone to than back home, so I'll stay where I am. I think more and more people now are saying either we don't need to go away, or they're saying we've gone away, but in fact, you know, we can go back because there's possibilities there. And certainly, I mean, if you think, you know, back 30, 40 years, I mean, it's like chalk and cheese. The situation now here, I think for young people in the business is, you know, much more positive. It doesn't guarantee anything, of course, but it is much more positive. And if you actually look at the number of actors specifically who were involved in Game of Thrones, ultimately quite a lot were, you know, in some cases quite a lot, you know, featured in significant roles. People like, you know, myself, Michelle Fairley, Commonwealth Hill, you know, to name just a few, you know, all had sort of like significant runs in it. But there were many more who were involved, you know, here, there, wherever. So I think, you know, that was good, and I think, you know, with a bit of luck, it opens up the kind of the perception that we can and we should seek to cast locally, you know. I think that's beginning to happen more, and I think it's about time it did. I think too often in the past, oh, we'll cast in London, we'll cast in Dublin, and then we'll fill in from Northern Ireland. And you want to say, look, you're shooting it in Northern Ireland, we'll try and cast it in Northern Ireland if it's a Northern Ireland piece. If it's not a Northern Ireland piece, still look at the actors. They might actually be quite useful for whatever, you know. For too long, I think it was a case of, oh, outside of London, we'll go and look in Dublin. Why? Why would you go to Dublin if you're shooting up here? And if you're, you know, I'm not saying you shouldn't go to Dublin, but I think why would you go there and overlook here? It makes no sense, you know.
So, folks, if anybody has any questions that they would like to ask, by all means.
Favorite battlefield in the show,
Favorite battlefield?
Oh, well, I think actually just in terms of television, I thought the Battle of the Bastards was absolutely amazing.
Yeah.
And I mean, despite having worked on the series, you looked at this and you just thought to yourself, how the hell did they ever do that? You know, I thought it was amazing, just television. Yeah, I mean, you just looked at it and you thought, how many shots to make that? And because you know what it's like to be on a set, you're looking at it kind of in admiration just at the amount of work and thought and planning that must have gone in to make something like that happen. Because I think it's an extraordinary sequence, and I think we will probably see it topped in this new series. I mean, this new series, you know, they spent a long time making 6 episodes. Now, there may be 90-minuters, I'm not sure, but there's only 6 episodes. They spent an awful lot of time on it. There will be some amazing, cracking stuff, I'm sure, in those. Because they do it brilliant. You know?
Anybody else with a question they'd like to ask?
What was likes of Amelia Clark and all that to work with?
Amelia was lovely. You know, what you've got to realise, and it's hard for people to realise sometimes, is a lot of these people, you know, certainly the kids like Arya and Sansa and Bran, they were kids coming in, and they've all grown and done very well in it. And I think what's interesting, I think Sansa's really come on as the time has gone on. I've always thought Arya was amazing, it would be Maisie Williams, and I mean she's great as she's grown. And Amelia the same.
She was in Doctor Who as well.
Was she? Yeah. And then, you know, you check somebody like Amelia. Amelia was a bit older, but Amelia again was not that old. She was not long out of drama school. It was like, you know, what's going to happen in my life? And then she gets this. And fair play to her. She really took it on and she's brilliant in it, you know, and she's got a big future ahead of her. But, you know, the interesting thing is, she too was a relative newcomer. Do you know what I mean? It's not like she was already an established actor. She wasn't. She was the right girl for the job, and she did it really well. And who knows where she goes from here? You know.
Any other questions? Silence is cool. Well, maybe we'd just like to say a big thank you to Ian, and we'll give him a big round of applause. Second interview you've had, so very appreciative of your time and your insight into your time in Game of Thrones. Thanks very much, ladies and gentlemen, and just another round of applause for Ian.